Hello, bonjour, and oki to everyone. Welcome to Nonprofits at 2. I'm Karen Ball, President and CEO of CCVO. In looking through the guests for today's gathering, I was struck by how many new first-time Nonprofit at 2 guests we have today. So if you're joining us for the first time or for the 5th time since this series began in September, welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the place where we at CCVO are fortunate to call home. We honor and acknowledge the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Nakota nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. As a settler and an ally, I'm proud to call Mohkinstsis home. We're all treaty people. CCVO is thrilled to be able to announce a great new partnership for the Nonprofit at 2 series with ATB Financial. I'm joined today by a champion for the nonprofit sector, a community leader, and my friend, Jen Johnson. Welcome, Jen, Managing Director, Sponsorship and Community Initiatives for ATB Financial.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's very kind words. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to join you today and speak to ATB's new partnership with the CCVO and their Nonprofits at 2 series. We really understand that Alberta's nonprofit sector has been hit particularly hard by the impacts of the pandemic, and many of you have worked tirelessly this past year to find a new way forward to continue to support Albertans and ensure the vibrant connection with their communities is waiting for them through and on the other side of COVID-19. ATB believes this is really important work, and through our conversations with Karen and her team, it became clear the CCVO did too. So our intention in supporting the Nonprofit at 2 series is to ensure this sector and its professionals can stay informed, feel connected, and remain hopeful to take on what's yet to come. And we hope these conversations help you with that. And small plug, if your organization is in need of financial guidance or planning for the darker or brighter days ahead, our branch for arts and culture has a suite of products and services customized for the nonprofit sector, and everyone can check their inbox after the event for more information. So thank you again. I'm happy to be here, and I hope you all stay healthy, positive, and hopeful.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks to ATB Financial for being such a great partner with the nonprofit sector and on this series. So today's gathering is presented by ATB Financial. It's also supported by the Matart Foundation, PwC Canada, and our media partner, Postmedia. And of course, our core supporters that make it possible for CCVO to strengthen our nonprofit networks and advocate for the needs of the sector year-round. Before I introduce our amazing panel, a few points about today's gathering. During the panel discussion that takes place over the first half of this session, you'll be able to submit questions for live question and answer portion that takes place in the second half. At the end of each event, you'll also have a chance to answer a few short questions of your own about your experience today, and we hope you take the time to complete the short survey and share your thoughts with us so that we can ensure that Nonprofits at 2 remains relevant and responsive to your interests and needs. And now on to the main event. Today's moderator is Director Everyday Advice with ATB Financial, Neetu Sidhu. Over the past 15 years, Neetu has designed and brought to market strategies in fashion, technology, social enterprise, oil and gas, crowdfunding, marketing, and banking. With an interdisciplinary master's degree from New York University in social entrepreneurship, Neetu is exploring how AI and experience design can create greater financial wellness for Albertans as we rebuild through this pandemic. She also leads Innovate, ATB's gender equity network, mentors through the Young Women in Business Calgary chapter, and sits on the board of QB Consulting, a San Francisco-based diversity and inclusion consulting firm. Joining Neetu are panelists, Jordana Armstrong. Jordana leads Innovate Calgary's social innovation portfolio, supporting hundreds of impact-oriented researchers and entrepreneurs at the University of Calgary, where she launched their first programs for social entrepreneurs. She's a member of Local Investing YYC, CEO Activator, and an emerging impact investor, a Banff Center Getting to Maybe alumna, director with Artisri Sud, and BioLight Emerging Markets Fellow. Welcome, Jordana. Jane Bisbee. Jane is the Executive Director of the Social Enterprise Fund, one of Canada's more active impact investment funds with more than 60 million placed since 2008. A focus of her career has been the creation of non-traditional funding mechanisms for small business, in particular the cultural industries. She served on many boards, received a Lifetime Achievement Award with Alberta's film industry, and is a fellow of the Bale RSF Financial Community Foundation Circle. Welcome, Jane. Sean B. Fraser. Sean has a background in technology, theater arts, and production with a degree in business management. He's chaired on many nonprofit boards and has extensive experience working in property and arts facility management. Sean is the Executive Director of Evergreen Theatre, a Disney University Management graduate, and recipient of the Colin Jackson and Arlene Strom Creative Placemaking Award for his work on the Evergreen Community Spaces Project, a nonprofit social enterprise. Welcome, Sean. And Dan Overall. Hi, Dan. Dan is Executive Director of the Trico Foundation, which seeks to close gaps in society by provoking innovation and building capacity in social entrepreneurship. His highlights as ED include overseeing Canada's hosting of the Social Enterprise World Forum, organizing the first official social entrepreneurship day in Calgary, and overseeing the funding of key social enterprise infrastructure projects like the Changemaker Studio at Mount Royal University and the Social Enterprise Entrepreneurship Center at Haskayne. Welcome, Dan. Now, if I could ask all of our panelists to turn on your cameras and join me in the session, I'll leave things in the capable hands of Neetu to start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Karen, and the entire CCVO team for this opportunity to moderate such an important conversation. And thank you to everyone who is tuning in today, and a special thanks to all of our amazing panelists. On behalf of ATB Financial, I am thrilled to host this conversation on the intersection of purpose and profit, which is a theme that really underscores today's topics of social finance and social entrepreneurship. Before we get started, I'd like to just take a minute to level set on why we are all on this webinar today. We know that the nonprofit sector plays a critical role in contributing not only to the health and well-being, but also the economic security and cultural vibrancy that taken together really contribute to a good quality of life here in Canada. It's no surprise to our audience that COVID-19 has devastated the nonprofit sector across Canada, but certainly right here at home in Alberta. Research from CCVO, Imagine Canada, and others shows that because of the pandemic, 85% of nonprofits have seen reduced funding from their traditional donor bases. Nearly 80% have seen reduced revenue from earned income. The government of Alberta has decreased its funding to nonprofits by $12 million this year, and nearly 40% of Albertans are donating less to charity than before the pandemic. And while we are seeing a less resource pool for nonprofits to fund their operations, there's a 73% demand and increase for their services and a 75% increase in the costs associated with adapting to those programs. Many of you may know that nonprofits are trying to streamline costs and reduce overhead, which has put them in a bit of a predicament as they're now working to enable remote work for their employees. So 40% of nonprofits in Alberta have temporarily or permanently shut down operations, and over 50% have reduced staff hours due to budgetary constraints. So this pandemic's impact on the nonprofit sector has a deep multiplier effect. Not only is it impacting the organizations and their staff, but certainly the vulnerable and marginalized and incredibly underserved communities and individuals who rely on their services. So while the situation is dire, there is this humanitarian and financial crisis at play, Alberta's nonprofit sector is adapting and showing true strength and resiliency. So today we're going to focus on the topic of social finance and social entrepreneurship as timely lifelines that offer opportunities for nonprofits to pivot their funding models as well as their operating models and begin to not only survive but also thrive into the future. This intersection of purpose and profit is really about creating this term that's used often in this field of social entrepreneurship, which is blended value, where both the traditional financial world and the social impact worlds collide to further both social impact and financial sustainability. So with that, let's kick things off with actually defining what social finance is. We know it can take on different meanings in different contexts. So from the viewpoint of the organization I represent, and as a member of ATB Financial, I can share a bit about how we are approaching social finance, which entails investing in new digital platforms to build community, to enable the access of capital, to leverage debt, equity, as well as wealth investments to enable positive social outcomes. ATB supports nonprofit organizations through specialty lending programs, industry expertise, as well as unconventional access to capital through our crowdfunding platforms, ATB Booster and ATB Cares. Nonprofits can also leverage ATB's newest e-commerce platform, ATB Marketplace, which becomes a place to sell products and services to the broader community. So that's sort of our take from ATB on social finance. Panelists, I'd love to hear from you, and from the vantage point of the organizations that you represent, how are you defining social finance?
So I think, Neetu, you wanted me to go first. So thank you very much for coming today, and also to CCVO for inviting me. So SEF is a social finance intermediary. We place money into social entrepreneurs. Social finance is really just finance. Financing is a tool, right? It's a whole bunch of different kinds of things: loans, equities, angel investments, venture capital. You probably heard all of those words used once or another. I think what makes social finance different, and this builds on something that Neetu said, is about intentionality, and it's really intent. That's what makes this different. So what I come in and try to do every day is figure out how to use money as a tool to do good in community. What can we do with the money that we have to further what not-for-profit organizations, social entrepreneurs, are trying to accomplish in delivering their missions? So the first thing we look at is mission, and I think that's what makes a social finance intermediary different than other kinds of people in the financing world. It also means that there is a little different engagement, and a lot that is different about social finance is how we behave in relation to our clients in the long run. So sometimes you hear this called slow or patient capital. We are in this field, my colleagues that are doing this kind of work, we often can take a longer and slower view than perhaps a financial institution like ATB can take. It's a different sort of situation because our days are ruled by the intention of the delivery of mission. So it may mean that I can wait a little longer for the payments. I can take a more imaginative view to securities. I can work differently with how the finance in the end works. I'll just add one last thing, is that what's very true about this kind of finance in my world is that we are working to make the organization succeed. If our loan destroys an organization, then I've failed. It's about the fact that we have to work with the organization to make these tools work to make something good go. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure we can talk about it a bit more.
Thanks so much, Jane. I love what you said there about intentionality, and I'll hand it over to you, Jordana.
Thanks, Neetu, and thanks, Jane, for setting that beautiful context, and to the folks at CCVO for hosting this important conversation. Jane always sets beautiful context, so I don't have a lot more to add to that, except just speaking from the lens of our organization. So as many know, Innovate Calgary is an organization that serves early stage entrepreneurs at the University of Calgary primarily, and so we're most frequently working with academic researchers, but also students. And so when I think about social finance as covered by Jane and Neetu, it is really an umbrella term that covers a whole spectrum of tools that are leveraged to create positive social change. The one that we work most commonly with is impact investing. And so how does impact investing differ from traditional investing? I think often when we think about what the intention of traditional business or traditional investors is, it's to maximize shareholder value. And so when we add that intentionality, like Jane spoke to, around how we create impact or the intention of that investment, that's sort of where impact investing emerges. And I think in future, we'll see more and more that these worlds collide, and we might not need to use that, that qualifier of impact or social, because I think we're seeing an evolution across the spectrum. And then just from our lens in terms of working with early entrepreneurs, one of the biggest differences I see is the mindset of an investment versus a grant. And so working with, in particular, academic researchers who are used to leveraging grants in their research enterprise, an investment is really capital that is meant to create an increased value within an organization in a broader sense of that. And so that's achieved through business value and also impact value. And so when we think about grant making, often these are time-bound project-based, most frequently, not always, tied to activities or budget line items. And typically you spend a grant down. And so there's just a slight nuance in terms of how you might think about capital influx as a result of an investment to a grant. And that's one of the hurdles that we've found we work with entrepreneurs who come from a grant making world to get over when they think about how they evolve their perspectives to be able to be recipients of impact investing. So that's just a slight nuance. And once those mindsets have shifted, we find that those folks find the easiest traction or the most amount of alignment with impact investors.
Thanks for that, Jordana. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting evolution there with bringing social finance into academia. So great to hear a little bit more from you on that. Dan, we'd love to hear from you, and then we'll wrap it up on this question with Sean.
Yeah, for us, our understanding of social finance is it's a financial instrument that seeks both a financial return and a social impact.
Nice and succinct. All right, I like it. Sean?
It's hard to follow up on all of that. I got to say, my colleagues have nailed it. I mean, we are and have been a client working with Jane's organization for almost 10 years now in the work that we do. And really for us, from an end user perspective, social finance has really been about opportunity to capital and to pursuing projects that we never would have been afforded to under sort of traditional finance rules, simply because of who we are, how we generate our money, and those types of activities. Less to do with, you know, directly about what we do or why we do it, but more because of the kind of organization we are and how we're structured and those types of things. So social finance is an opportunity for non-traditional folks to potentially access capital that just wouldn't be afforded otherwise, among a whole of other things that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But from a sort of baseline, that's what I would say.
Yeah, there's something really powerful there that I think I'm hearing from everybody, which is, you know, traditionally our world and our society has been organized in ways that's almost pitted, you know, the capitalist world of profit against the social impact world. And what social finance is really doing is creating a bridge to show both of those worlds that they each have something to benefit from through a closer collaboration and a bit of a gravitational pull. So just for our audience, I think it would be great for us to, we mentioned social entrepreneurship and social enterprise a lot in this first bit around social finance. Let's just step back for a second and actually understand what social entrepreneurship is. And, you know, specifically, we know that social finance is a catalyst to enabling social entrepreneurship. But Jordana and Dan, what is a social entrepreneur? How is a social entrepreneur different than a regular entrepreneur, let's say?
I'm going to let Dan speak to that first because we always borrow his definition.
which we thank you for. So I love how you talked about this kind of like the simplest notion, because we find this gets complicated really fast. So just to set context, for us, social entrepreneur is the person, social enterprise is the organization, and social entrepreneurship is the activity. And for social entrepreneurship, the way we define it is you're using business models, which means you're selling a product or a service to solve a social problem. And I just want to add one more point. If you look at any idea, the definition of it is actually the most boring, least powerful aspect of it. The most powerful aspect of an idea is not what it is, but what you want to do with it, where you want to take it. And quite frankly, Trico Foundation is becoming increasingly worried that the social entrepreneurship discussion is in a definition rut. And we need to kind of transform so that now becomes a conversation about potential rather than definition. I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but I just wanted to plant that seed that we feel the conversation needs to move in that direction. And possibly I can elaborate on that with our further discussion.
Love that. That was really powerful. And I 100% agree with you. I think we're all stuck in the what is the right definition, and really it's about how you live it and how you experience it and the impact we make. So thanks so much for that. Jordana, over to you. Oh, I think Jordana.
The organizer, I had been muted. I think there was I always throw it over to Dan first because he nails it. I think the only thing that I would add, succinctly, is that we also view it as a mindset or an approach to tackling social problems, and in particular, agnostic to the form or type of organization. So when we think about social enterprise, agnostic to nonprofits or for-profits is the approach they use. And I just want to quote Bill Drayton, who was the founder of Ashoka. This is an organization that's been supporting social entrepreneurs for the past 25 years. When he thinks about social entrepreneurship, in seeing many people do it for a long time, it's people who see patterns around them, identify problems, figure out ways to solve the problems, organize fluid teams, lead collective action, and continually adapt as situations change. And so I think that actually harkens back to a mindset that someone applies to how they're solving a social problem or an approach that an individual is taking. So to echo Dan's point, social entrepreneurship as that approach, and then the individuals driving it with a particular mindset.
Wonderful. I love that definition from Bill Drayton. That's really powerful. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's really what it is it's an individual. A social entrepreneur, as Dan said, is the individual, and they are recognizing, to your point, Jordana, some sort of systemic issue that is impacting a large number of people or the environment, and they're applying, to something that Jane said earlier. It's about how you use money as a tool for social change, right? So they're trying to apply business model, entrepreneurialism, or money as a means to an end, but that end is not money in and of itself. It's the impact that gets created. So I love that. One of the, for nonprofits, which is a large base of our audience today, traditional financial sort of sources of funding have come from charitable donations, philanthropy, and grants. The pandemic, however, has highlighted and really accelerated the need for nonprofits to start to think about new funding sources, and also potentially, if this is a viable option for them, developing earned income streams attached to their operations. So Sean, as our executive director of Evergreen Theater and living that every day, what challenges and opportunities does social finance present for nonprofit organizations like yours?
Well, I mean, I would say coming into the arts from the top for me, I mean, and having a business background, that's always sort of been something that's kind of been in my mindset is that I think in the arts specifically, there's a bit of a lack of a sort of a business drive there, because I think sometimes the arts are undervalued. That being said, what social finance has allowed us to do is take on something that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. But doing that really is sort of a double-edged sword that we found. And so what it's done in connection, especially to a lot of actual grant and government support agencies, is it's put us in a situation that makes us a bit of an odd man out. And it's created some interesting challenges around folks being able to understand how we do what we do and who we are. And it's made us, and I'll use this comment which has been said to us in the past, is that we ended up being sort of a unicorn in a field of horses. Nobody really knows when we go after specific project grants or support programs, those kinds of things. We're never quite the whole thing that fits into a neat little package anymore. And while they're excited about what we do and how we're sort of sustaining, it's just not something that is been So while we thought it would be sort of a real coup in being able to say, well, look what we've done, we're standing on our own 2 feet, we have come up against a lot of sort of pushback around, well, yes, but you're not this and you're not that. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that we come up with is the debt on our books. Because there's been this traditional sort of look at, if there's debt on especially for not-for-profits, if there's any kind of a debt load at all on a balance sheet, well, then you must be badly managed. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're not recycling enough cans. You're not getting enough checks from people. Well, yeah, okay, so I understand that. There's a huge sort of risk averse to a lot of tradition, right? Is that the only way that we'll go forward is if there's absolutely no risk. And being able to have folks understand and look at a balance sheet and go, okay, well, yes, there is debt, but there is such thing as good debt. And if there's a well thought out long-term plan in why you're doing what you're doing, then maybe it needs to be revisited and looked at in sort of a different light. The other thing that we've run up against is not being able to sort of account for the fact that we actually own an asset and there's value to that asset, because that asset isn't really valuable until you liquidate it, right? And so, I mean, we're one of the few organizations, especially in the arts, that actually own their own facility. Which is, most arts organizations can't say that. Now, of course, that comes again with its own amount of challenges and those kinds of things. But so I would say that it's definitely a double-edged sword. And the positives around it for us is that we've been able to, like Jane said, take the time that we've been able to need to sort of prove what we knew would work, and have a partner that is able to move things around or change the terms of the agreement to be able to help us be successful, as opposed to which you're hearing a lot over this horrible COVID situation from all kinds of institutions and business entrepreneurs, is that the pressure to get the revenue to pay the bills is always there. Now, I'm not suggesting that in our circumstance that isn't there, but we have, through the relationship with social enterprise, we're able to renegotiate and look at those things in a longer term perspective as to, if we have a bit of patience now, this is the kind of return that we will have in the future. And the real big reason that we wanted to pursue this was to rely less on grants in the future. We wanted to take a different approach to what the future of this particular organization would look like, and do some really good things along the way in doing it. So that's what I would say has been some of the, I mean, we could go on with a lot more details, but in as succinct way as possible, I suppose. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Sean. And it's so nice to see that bright blue sky behind you.
I know, right? I know.
Winter. Sorry, I was paying attention to you, but also slightly distracted by the sunshine. So, I think you said something there that's really worth honing in on, which is around not only the challenges, certainly, but also the opportunities that long-termism mindset affords nonprofits in the social finance space, because you're not up against the pressures of quarterly returns on investment that a traditional for-profit organization would be. So, and not in all cases, but certainly in the relationship you have with social enterprise funds. So speaking of social enterprise fund, Jane, not all nonprofits are in the unique unicorn situation that Sean's in, where he has, the ability to create earned income streams through fees for the programs, as well as potentially leasing out parts of the building that they own. So for the nonprofits who are tuning in today, for whom the market sale of goods or services is not feasible, it just wouldn't make sense for their purpose and their mission, how can they participate in this world of social enterprise or social finance?
Well, I'm actually going to be a contrarian here a little bit because I don't think that's true. I think any nonprofit is in fact running a business and is selling services and or products. Now, their revenue stream might look a little different. Our CFO sometimes calls it lumpy, that nonprofit money is lumpy because it comes in a very weird pattern that a traditional banker, if they were doing an asset test on the financial statement, it would just make their eyes bug out because it doesn't look like what they're used to seeing. And I think some of the things that Sean was talking about really point to what the benefits of social finance and social entrepreneurship can bring to this sector is that it's a systemic mind change is what we need here. We need to think differently. I am so fed up with people not understanding that nonprofit organizations are not a part of the economy. They are. There should be the thinking at the federal government and at the provincial governments about how to support this sector should have been the same processes and thoughts that they were having about how to help small business recover, how to help large business recover. It's the same tools. So here's what I've learned about social finance and social enterprise. If you can start thinking about your business by stealing every trick that every MBA student has come up with and every small business has sorted out, and start to think about your business in that way. And I know a lot of nonprofit CEOs and executive directors do this anyway. You know how to do this. You know that rule number one is more money has to come in than goes out, and that's how you're successful. So it's almost a matter of looking at revenue streams and customers and starting to understand with a little bit of a different use of language what those revenue streams can be and what the kinds of tools that a social finance intermediary like me can offer you to use. So forgive me those of you who've heard this story before. Early on, I had a not-for-profit come to me and say, we have lost the government grant, so we'd like to try this social enterprise thing. And my response to them was, no, actually, you've lost a major customer. And what is it about your customer that they no longer want to purchase your service? And so if you can start to think about your revenue streams as, okay, that is a revenue that is being paid to me to actually offer this service. And after all, a grant, what is a grant? We need to think about what grants are. Grants are government who's been put together by we as a community to buy services for us, right? I need a healthcare system, but I'm not going to buy a hospital. But maybe me and Jordana could put our money together, and together we have an entity government, which then purchases those services for us. So if you start to think about your relationship with government and with grants in that way, is it them buying a service from you for a fee for service that you offer them? Or is the grant more like what an angel investor might do? A project grant to me looks a whole lot more like what an angel investment does to scale a business, right? You need money to be better at marketing. You need money to buy more computer systems. You need money, like Sean, to buy a building because it makes more sense for your organization. So you need the same tools. You need all the same tools that any small business needs. And that's what social finance can start to offer you, hopefully. And then someday, when you can actually show a financial statement to a bank, maybe they'll give you a loan or a line of credit because your money won't look so weird and lumpy. You will be taking advantage of the other kinds of revenue streams that are out there and available to you because you've improved your business through a logical investment of social finance. Social finance is not a replacement for your earned revenue stream. It's a way to improve your earned revenue stream and get there to that kind of business. It's not, forgive me, sorry if that disappoints you, it's not going to be a replacement for the customers you've lost and those revenue streams you've lost. But it may be a thing you can buy to help you get to that next level. And so I think that all nonprofits have access to market-based goods and services. You just have to discipline yourself a little bit to think differently and take advantage to all of those sorts of things that you can use and learn from our friends over in the small business world. Maybe I'll stop there.
Wow, yeah, that was great, Jane. Thank you so much for sort of expanding, you know, our horizons mentally around what social entrepreneurship is and how one can, or an organization can participate in that. There was a lot that you said there that I'd love to unpack with the panel. So any comments from the panel on any of what Jane just said?
Well, I mean, you know, it sort of relates to, I think, part of the next part of what we're sort of being asked to talk about. And from our perspective, in looking at the organization as, instead of putting value on what we do at every point. So, you know, just because we're an artist doesn't mean that there's no value to it, right? I mean, there's value to all of the things we do, to our programs, to the space that we offer, to how we offer those things. So what I've done in my organization is with the team that I brought on board, as opposed to, you know, the driving force coming from an artistic director being like, well, our mandate is to produce this type of art. I have really challenged and said, okay, that's fine, but what is the value that is going to bring to the audience that we're trying to get, or to the client, or to the customer? And what is it that they want? What is our consumer looking for? And asking the question and getting clear around, just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should, right? We need to be honest with ourselves about, is this a good idea or maybe not? Like, are we trying to saturate the market with things that other people are already doing? So I think that Jane is right. Every organization has an opportunity to look for clients and to look for customers. I mean, and they all provide value as long as you apply some traditional business ideas around those, and do some good analysis around it, around whether or not you should.
And, you know, just listening to you talk, it's not, a lot of what you said there was around customer experience, prioritization. It was around, you know, what you often see happen in the startup world is a startup founder who's super passionate and oozing with love for their baby is put into a board role, and then they bring in somebody who's going to really focus on operational scale, and they're put at the helm of the company. This happens all the time, especially in you know, the tech space, and that's not different than what you're talking about here. Is you need those checks and balances in running any organization. And maybe the question I'm about to ask, and it's a bit impromptu, is the name nonprofit working against nonprofits? Is that
yes.
already kind of stopping before they start here?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think because profit is seen as an evil thing, right? Like, well, if you're making a profit, well, then that must be going into the pockets of somebody. I mean, the only difference between a for-profit and a not-for-profit in a general context is one organization, an individual can take excess cash out and go buy a boat. Whereas, you know, in a not-for-profit, you can make profit. It just has to go back into the organization. I mean, it doesn't mean that there are different you know, in the larger context. I mean, there's certainly nuanced details that are different, but I think that whole term sort of already puts you in that category of like, well, you know, you're do-gooders. You're not really serious about what you do.
One thing I'd just like to add to that is how many industries are named not something. And if we think about what a nonprofit sector does, they create a particular value that we require in society. And that's why governments and taxpayers pay for a lot of the services, as Jane put it. And so I think I've heard social value. There's a lot of different ways to think about how we can frame that, but it really harkens back to the mindset that we have as a society and how we value even employees within nonprofit contexts. I mean, a lot of us familiar with the conversation around overhead within these organizations, but how do you access customers? How do you grow and scale impact? You need to be able to invest in the operations and the sustainability of an organization. And so I think preaching to the crowd a little bit here, and Jane's earlier comment, I would say, yes, and I so appreciate that lens around the social entrepreneur and the nonprofit leader. And I also think that that's the type of thinking that decision makers in institutions also need to have, whether they're grant makers or government, starting to think about this full spectrum of how we finance social benefit.
The name is challenging enough, but what's also a challenge is borderline the legal mandate where not-for-profits are not allowed to earn profit. And it's been really interesting, at least over the last decade, watching governments question why not-for-profits aren't resilient when they're not allowed to actually create a stock or a surplus or savings.
Some of you will maybe be, Sean, you'll be happy to hear this. I've actually gotten into some very interesting conversations recently with people inside of government, the federal government in particular, who are thinking to bring the Social Finance Fund into being, and talking to them about your example about being penalized because of a misunderstanding of what debt means on a financial statement. We don't give people often in the nonprofit sector credit or the tools to think about themselves differently. So I'm trying to create an underground movement where we just steal all those great ideas and put them to use to get the good done in community. And I love, Jordana, I love that comment about, why would we call something not, as like, what an awful starting point for a name. I'd not thought about that way before. That's a lovely piece. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jordana. It's just has a negative connotation to it. And, to the point that Jane made earlier, nonprofits contribute at least 8% to Canada's GDP. And they are a contributor not only financially, but think about just the human services, the economic security, the communities, and the supports to marginalized individuals. What is the valuation of that? What is the actual value of that to the government of Alberta or to the government of Canada that is provided by these nonprofits that otherwise would have to be funded in other ways and perhaps not through experts who are embedded in those communities? And so unfortunately, we just haven't built out, I kind of liken this to mothers, right? And no offense to the fathers out there, but there's an unpaid labor and it is what carries and builds the household. And this is very much like that, right? Nonprofits, not to add a maternal connotation here, but it is not recognized and valued to the extent that it should be. And it's a much harder job to do in a lot of ways. But anyways, I'm kind of getting into a bit of a feminist tangent there. I want to sort of bring the conversation back a little bit to this idea of social entrepreneurship and, an area that maybe hasn't been used a lot in the nonprofit sector, or maybe it's not something that nonprofits are traditionally known for as much, but we see that changing now. So, and that's the field of technology, right? So we know that globally, if you look at social entrepreneurism, especially in developing countries, you see these social impact models being proven and scaled through exponential technology. Jordana, what advice, just coming from your sort of innovation and technology lens, what advice do you have around the importance of tech and innovation for some of our nonprofit partners who are looking to, pivot their models or completely reinvent how they operate their organizations? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Neetu, thank you. I was thinking about this question yesterday, and there are exponential ways to answer this. And so if anyone knows me, they know I can't resist a good pun. But seriously, I think one thing that's important to recognize is that innovating is not the same as improving or as operationalizing, and that you often need different people to pursue these different functions, but you certainly need a different mindset and a different set of rules in order to innovate. And that innovation may not always be the goal. So I'll get back to technology, but if innovation is your goal, I would encourage organizations to think about how can we adapt existing resources or teams to be able to innovate rather than can we. I think that's an important nuance in thinking about how to shift resources. And then when you don't have those internal resources, what are the opportunities to either partner or upskill staff in order to be able to innovate. So such as, you know, there are university courses that are available where nonprofit organizations can access young talent to be able to undertake a specific project. There are organizations locally like the Data for Good chapter that helps organizations think about how to maximize data in order to improve strategy and operations. Programs like what Trico offers, the Assess, to kind of upskill the social entrepreneurship kind of ways of thinking and mindsets an organization has. And then because you mentioned exponential tech, I think it's important for us to also recognize that I always forget where it comes from, but the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And so technology exists. It is a toolkit. It's a tool in your toolkit that you can utilize just like social finance. And I think it's a tool that enables a particular goal or a particular outcome. And I think there are really great examples of technology that are exponential technologies that are being utilized for social good. So one that comes to mind is a McConnell Foundation funded civic assets project where they're using blockchain technology, specifically smart contracts, to enable citizens and organizations of various sizes to participate in almost microfinancing for public infrastructure projects. And I think something like this has really interesting implications for wealth distribution, but also raises really good questions for us as a society to contemplate regarding public and private value and ownership. And in particular, I think we need nonprofit leaders to participate in these conversations, representing the communities that they know well and that they serve. And then I would just say that if you're new to this space and you're new to thinking about technology, just start to learn and be curious about how technology can enable change in your organization, from, I already mentioned, potentially leveraging data differently, to, as you said in your question, reinventing models for service delivery overall. So small things like, can you put a Google AdWords or follow newsletters of newsletters of tech-oriented groups or technologies that spark your interests? Can you hire an intern to explore? And again, I already mentioned this, but find willing partners or organizations that you can collaborate with to start to build that capacity in-house. And saying this all with the caveat that, Neetu, the way you kicked off this conversation is recognizing that there is a massive amount of constraint in these organizations. And so really not asking folks to think about doing more with less, but asking folks to think about shifting their mindsets and ways of working internally with existing resources to potentially create small pockets or opportunities for change. And I might just, open it up because I think many of our colleagues might have some things to add there.
Once again, you've done us proud.
Did you have anyone else from the panel have a thought or a comment following up on what Jordana just so eloquently said? I mean, the one thing that stood out to me that's really powerful in that is, if I look at the work that we're doing right now within ETB Financial, our customer is at the center of what we're trying to build. We're always looking at the impact we're trying to create rather than the output or the outcome. It's about the impact. And, if you always focus on the impact you're creating, then, the funding or the technology is just an enabler. It's not the star of the show, right? It's the customer who's the star of the show. So in the using Jane's language for nonprofit partners, and every time I use that lingo now, I'm just like kicking myself internally. We need to change that name. Maybe we can get there by the end of this call today. But who is your customer? Who is the community or the individual, the constituency that you're serving? And what is going to allow you to help further their needs? And how can social finance or exponential technology be an enabler? Okay, and then I'm just going to allow a little bit of awkward silence unless there's somebody else who had a comment there.
Neetu, the only thing I would add there is that there are also tools, methodologies, and processes that people can use to start to build innovative processes within their organization. I know that I've included some in the resources that will be sent out at the end, and I think probably these folks have as well. And some of the things that I've mentioned are included, including Dan's SS program. So I don't think folks need to feel like they're walking that journey alone if they're new to it.
Okay, wonderful. And
Neetu,
go ahead, Jane. Yeah.
I was going to just quickly from something that you said, really focusing on customer, but also understanding your customer might not be your stakeholder. Your stakeholder might not be your customer. If you're in a nonprofit service organization, you may be supporting, say, disabled people. Are they the people that are necessary paying for that service, or is your customer someone else? And then that goes down to really understanding what your revenue stream is and where your customer base is, so that there might be two levels of interaction that you have to take into account there. I agree with what you said. It's just, I just be sure to take it just that one little step further to understand in this kind of service provision, you may be in a situation where the two are slightly different.
Absolutely. And even, you know, in a private sector organization, you might have a customer who is an internal team member, right? It could be, you know, a sponsor organization that you're working with, a partner in the community. Ultimately, I think it comes down to, in the example you used, Jane, which I loved, is build a business case. So if your customer is not the disabled individual you're helping, but the actual government, what's the cost of them providing this service through other channels? What's the cost, the lost opportunity cost of not addressing those needs? What are all of the things that they would have to bring forward to actually serve that community versus the funding that you're asking for? And I think that's the business case that really needs to be presented more.
Absolutely. I get a lot of business cases presented to me where people are telling me all the wonderful things they're going to do for the stakeholder. And I have to keep dragging them back, but who's going to pay for it? Where is the revenue stream? Because that's the business planning tool that you have to put into place to understand if what you want to do is actually feasible or not. And the one discipline that often not-for-profits don't put in place, because we've never really expected them to, is the thing that an MBA student does automatically, which is sorts out, this is a great idea, but the truth is that it sucks because nobody wants to pay for it. And I've asked MBA students and they've said to me, oh yeah, 95% of ideas fail that test. There's only 5% of ideas which are good enough to actually attract a revenue stream and a customer base. And we, in this particular sector, I don't think we've ever forced ourselves to really do that, to really drill down on what is it about my product or service that's the best, and why should they buy mine and not somebody else's down the street? So it really is part of the process that I think people could learn from and benefit from in this world. So,
Neetu, may I just, jumping on top of that, Jane? In technology transfer, when we're working with inventors, we have to be very conscientious that inventors, it's hard to tell an inventor their baby is ugly. And I think that in the context of working with people who are wholeheartedly trying to serve a social problem, it's sometimes hard to hear that advice. And so just a reminder that if we put the social problem first, that then maybe customer feedback is a little bit more palatable, because it's not that your baby's ugly, it's that your customer thinks your baby needs a hat. I don't know.
And you know, going back to, thanks for that, Jordana. I think going back to sort of what Jane was talking about there, you know, if your customer is the government and they are sort of what is the blocker in the path of you getting the funding you need as a nonprofit organization, how can you help enlighten them and grow their mindset around the needs and the priorities? Why should that be a priority? And depending on who's in government and what their political platform is and what their appetite is for supporting this sector, they might need a little bit more nudging than, you know, that what might seem obvious to the nonprofit organization and that is closest to the stakeholders might need a bit more of a pronounced business case. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely something there. We have a couple more minutes in this session. Jane, did you want to follow up there? No, all good. Okay, so we've got a couple more minutes before we switch over to the audience Q&A. For the audience members, I just encourage you to submit questions through the question box. We've got a few questions so far, but definitely would love to hear from you. And this panel is fired up and ready to engage with whatever questions you might have. So I guess before we turn it over to the audience, one question I wanted to sort of dig into a bit is, social finance investments often come with this expectation that you spoke about really clearly right from the get-go, Dan, when you were defining what social finance is, and that's that they come with an expectation for both a social and a financial return on investment. So right now, given if we read the room, if we understand the extreme challenges and growing pressures that are being faced by nonprofit organizations through this pandemic, if they are ready for that type of investment, how can they deliver on both of those fronts, given the fact that they're down on their staff and their support, and funding is very scarce at this point, and they might not be set up in a way from a technological or service delivery model that's suitable to the pandemic. So what advice do you have for them there?
Well, we could probably devote a whole session to that question alone. What jumps out at me is the approach we take at Trico is you really have to understand how your social and the entrepreneurial aspects of your social enterprise are combining or blending. So we have found some blends actually add costs, but have picked an entrepreneurial model to demand low costs. So they're in contradictions. That makes it almost impossible to deliver on financial impact as well as social impact. Some blends have kind of like the social impacts over here and the entrepreneurial model is kind of over here. There, you can do it, but it can still be hard. We're finding the blends where it's the easiest to deliver both on financial and social impact is where the social and the entrepreneurial are almost like combined and they're like synergistic. And if you look at the Trico materials that we'll be sending you, we'll actually give examples of that. But in addition to looking at your blend, and it's kind of weird talking about the blend of the social and the entrepreneurial, I find that we're just beginning to understand how those two can actually combine. And one of the reasons for that is we're actually recovering from an era which assumed as a kind of predominant model that you earn money over here and you have social impact here, right? They're separate, as opposed to now we're starting to learn you can actually combine them. In fact, one can be stronger because of the other and vice versa. But the final point I'd like to make on that is you always have to ask yourself as to deliver for who. And some of the materials that we'll be sending you is from Kathy Clark, who works out of Duke and just does fantastic stuff. And she tracks social entrepreneurs who've received financing. And she's found that they get whacked up in the head for three basic reasons. One, the funders will actually say, you know what? If we get rid of the social part, we can make so much more money. So we're going to do that now. Thank you very much. The other way they get smacked up the side of the head is where they go, you've taken it this far. We think we need to have it scaled more. We don't think you can do that. So we're going to get someone else to do that. And then the final challenge is what Kathy calls the speedboat, where because there's so much pressure on funders to deliver quickly, and for most funder models, especially in social finance and certainly venture capital, 20% of the ventures fund the other 80%. So when they see something that might be a success, they want to have it a success and pay out as quickly as possible. So there's this huge pressure. So you have to be very careful when you're talking about either funding models or any type of assistance, when you're delivering for someone, that you're on exactly the same page of what you want to deliver.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm still processing. There's so many good nuggets in there, just around profit needs purpose just as much as purpose needs profit, and the two worlds coming together and working in tandem. And where we've seen that work really well in the social enterprise space is where the social mission, or whatever theory of change, the entire reason for why that social enterprise exists is embedded into the core operations. So as you are manufacturing, as your employees are going to work, as the gears of your business or your organization are running, inevitably in tandem, you are both growing revenue and impact. Revenue and impact, they sort of link together and work really beautifully in that harmony. And that's really the sweet spot, which I think you were talking about there, Dan. Okay, so we're gonna switch over to audience Q&A here in a second, but before we do, Jane, I would love to hear from you from Steph's perspective. What advice do you have to our nonprofit partners who are tuning in today and thinking about how can I get investment ready? How can I partake in this world?
Not to repeat too much of what we've already said, maybe two key things that I would emphasize. One is to take the time, and I know right now this is really hard to hear, but take the time to look deeply inside of yourself and your organization. And what is it that you already have and already know and are already good at that you might push just a little bit, that might be the thing that could actually turn around your operation? Instead of deciding that you're going to start a coffee shop when you have no idea about anything to do with a coffee shop, and that's going to be your social enterprise, what is it inside your own organization that you might take to the next level? And Sean's a great example of that. He had a small building that he was working with a few people and has taken it to a big building, and now he's working with a lot of people. So what is it that you have the background skills to do already inside that maybe there's more customer for? And the second piece comes out of something that Dan just said, which is be very careful who your social finance partner is. This is kind of like a marriage. You better like them. You better like what their intention is and what they want out of it, what their feeling is about benefits, and make sure that it's the right fit for you, because it could be awful if it wasn't. I'd love to spend, I think we've had topics today. Dan just brought up a couple of things. I think we need a whole entire another set of workshops on them, because there's some great stuff there, but I'll leave it at those two pieces for now.
Neetu, I think you're muted. Maybe while Neetu comes back together, I'm going to jump in here for a second and say,
God bless technology, eh?
I don't have access to the Q&A, but here it is. When would social finance not be appropriate for a nonprofit or a charity? For the panel from our Q&A. And Neetu, can you try your mic just so we can see? Oh, now we've lost you. But I'll fill this spot, not as nicely, I'm sure.
Can everybody hear me now? Am I back? Okay, wonderful. Sorry. Yeah, so Karen, thank you for setting up the first question. Do we want to repeat the question, or are you good?
The question is, when would social finance not be appropriate for a nonprofit or charity? Hand it over to you.
So anyone on the panel want to take a crack at that one?
Maybe I'll start in our case. Because we use mostly loans, it's if there is no hope that you have enough of a revenue stream to support the borrowing, then it's not going to be appropriate. Because if you dig yourself a great big hole that you can't climb out of, then that's not great. But we've found that in way more cases than not, it's possible to figure out a way to make it work. We have, a pretty darn good success rate. It is, I've been told, much better than most regular banks have, because nonprofits, I've found, will move heaven and earth to pay us back. Now we try to work on the other side to make it possible. So it may be, it is a situation where you're buying a tool that you're going to improve something with. And if the tool isn't going to help make it work better, then it's probably not something that you would need or want. But really what I end up looking at a lot is, can you actually afford to buy that tool and use it? So.
And I would imagine any organization, again, applying business sort of acumen to it, is that you've got to know what your market will handle, right? I mean, if you're like anything, if you're trying to open a stationery store beside a Staples, that's not a good idea. Like, so I think that sometimes folks get, and I've experienced this a lot in the arts world, is, you know, artists are terribly passionate about what they do and what they offer, but if you're trying to make that as a business, you need to be sure that it's something that is unique enough or that people want, and if it isn't those, honestly isn't those things, then this kind of opportunity or arrangement probably wouldn't be the right way to go about it.
Yeah, great thoughts there. And I guess just a follow-up to that from the audience is, in what instances does the panel feel it would be better for a nonprofit to consider debt versus equity versus, let's say, unconventional forms of fundraising such as crowdfunding, perhaps?
So a nonprofit can't take equity, right? Because you can't pay out the shareholders, you can't pay out dividends. So an equity for a straight nonprofit structure is kind of not a thing that helps you. Sometimes a grant will act like an angel investment or a venture capital play. It will do the same thing, but doesn't have the payout at the end, the financial payout at the end. Money is different at different times during the growth of a company. So sometimes you want love money, which is friends and neighbors providing you with little bits of help to get to a certain stage where you then might be buying money from a bank or from another investor to take you to the next level. And then you grow to the point where you go after a big venture capital play. It acts differently during different times. It looks differently. As a line of credit behaves differently from a mortgage, behaves differently from a scaling loan. So it's a matter of, we'd have to actually answer that validly, we'd have to take a look at the specifics a little more than just the general question. But money doesn't always look the same. Looks differently, acts differently.
Yeah, and I guess in the cooperative model, we could see equity in terms of ownership. So a community-based cooperative would be an example of where equity could come into play for the nonprofit. But I understand that a cooperative structure is not always amenable to every organization.
It's a cool model. It does a lot of interesting things. Yeah.
And to your point, there is an evolution. We've seen, cooperatives like Mountain Equipment Co-op, for example, be sold to private organizations as they've grown and scaled. But in the beginning, they were able to operate as a co-op. And so, you might start off with some love money through crowdfunding, evolve into becoming a co-op, maybe take on a small amount of debt, and then eventually go to more complex financial funding models.
Yeah, we have a pretty healthy and imaginative cooperative system in Alberta, and people have been able to do some very interesting things with that model. But that's usually a real grassroots. We're going to fix this amongst ourselves, a neighborhood that decides it's going to change something and puts the money together to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, Jane, we have not been, so USEED is an early stage fund that exists at the University of Calgary and does use equity as a structure. And so completely echoing what Jane said, if you did have a nonprofit that had a more creative structure where the nonprofit owned a for-profit or there were affiliated organizations, something that we've seen in terms of a mindset shift, and just kind of hearkening back to the first question that we asked around, what is social finance as a tool? What we find is really wrapping your head around, if you have a traditional equity investment or an equity investment from impact investors, there's something called an exit that you have to think about. So people still want their money back. Sometimes I think it feels like free money because you're issuing shares. And so investors are going to be expecting you to be able to create more value so that either future investors will buy that company, or future investors will buy your shares out of that company, or you would potentially go public or be acquired by another company. And so there has to be a particular type of growth trajectory that may sometimes be in tension with the type of impact model a nonprofit is delivering. And I didn't include it in the resources, but I love the way that McConnell Foundation frames the idea of scaling impact as scaling up, scaling wide, and scaling deep. And so some of those impact scaling models do align with investors who are thinking about scale in that way. But when you're thinking about scaling deep with a particular community, sometimes there's a misalignment there. And so that would be another thing I think I would just add.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. We have a question from the audience, and they're quite motivated to change the name of nonprofit, and they're wondering, what do you think of starting to use the term social profit? Any reactions to that?
It's a term they've been using up in Fort McMurray, and I think it's brilliant. Yeah, it's the kick we need to make us start thinking about this whole thing differently.
Sean? Yeah. Dan, I feel like you might have a really great opinion on that, or any other thoughts around this idea of a different name for the nonprofit sector that you've seen be used perhaps in other places in the world?
Oh, I like that term, but for sure, as a starter, to stop naming something what it's not would be a huge step forward.
Yeah, for sure. So this next question is, really responding to some of the comments that the panelists have made. So how is a nonprofit, do we sustain a social enterprise model when our target audience has little to no money? We'd be trying to sell a product to a sector that cannot afford it. And they quoted some examples, schools, teachers, and other nonprofits. So what recommendations would you have for those who are in this situation? And maybe I'll point that one to Jane, and then anyone who wants to comment, feel free.
Well, that's part of the challenge about deciding whether or not you are a business and actually understanding who your customer are. So the people who are benefiting from the work you do may not be your initial customer because they're not purchasing the service. So who are the people that want that to happen and want that service to be available? It might be us as community, as expressed through a level of government. It might be another entity that is deciding. I mean, donors are customers too, right? When I say think about your revenue streams and who wants this thing to happen, you need to take a look at all of the reasons so that those people might be paying towards something. So government may have decided that it wants a certain sort of service to happen. Let's use an arts analogy. I used to work for a symphony orchestra. Now there is a crazy business proposition because it's profoundly expensive to put the band on stage, and so you can never charge enough to the tickets to the people who are sitting in the audience. But we as community have decided that we want the benefits of a symphony orchestra, and so we pay for it through grants together. We put our money into government, we pool it to drive the ticket price down. So in that case, you have donors who want this to happen, you have a government who wants it to happen, and you have actual customers. So it's a matter of understanding the entire range of revenues and looking really carefully at the entire range of revenues that come to you, because you may not be thinking of somebody as a customer when in fact they are. So yes, it's a real challenge. And sometimes, to go back to the analogy of, the MBA student deciding whether this business can succeed, it might be that it's something that community cannot or will not afford. So that's when we have to then, as citizens, guide our governments as to what we think they need to be buying on our behalf and supporting and paying for on our behalf. But there are choices to be made all the way along. They're customer buying something, so they don't want to buy what you're selling. If there is no customer, then we're all in trouble to be able to have that thing happen.
It's something that we deal with in our organization a lot and all the time, because all of a lot of the clients that use the programming that we offer, and the space that we offer are all come from very different backgrounds, needs, and abilities, right? So we have, we don't have one price for one thing. One of our mandates is accessibility. So we're continuously looking at, okay, well, what is going to work, sort of like what Jane does for her clients, we do for every single one of our clients, and say, okay, well, what is reasonable here in this particular circumstance? Because I've been told, and I've heard from folks that are like, well, why don't you just charge $100 an hour for space? Like, that's what the rate is. Well, that creates a whole other problem, because we're trying to get folks space that can't afford to do that, right? That would defeat the whole purpose. So I think that you have to really sort of assess, like Jane was saying, you've got to really assess sort of each step of the way, and keep your organization open-minded enough to look for opportunities, as opposed to saying, well, we're only going to do this and that's just it. And I know that can be a daunting thing to say. It's easy for me to sit here and say, especially in the social services type environment, I do appreciate that is not as easy to do, but it's a good lens to look through when you're sort of putting your whole plan together, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. It sort of goes back to the point Jordana made earlier, which is, it's not that your baby's ugly, but maybe your baby just needs a hat, right? And all organizations are being asked, all organizations are being asked to pivot and be adaptive. And I think a couple summary points here for the individual or organization that asked that question. What we heard from Sean and from Jane is, really focus on the value proposition of the service that you're offering. Is it actually a need in the market? Is it desirable? Is it feasible for you to deliver this? And is it something that's actually viable to bring to market? That's really important. And one model that's really worked well in my experience in the social enterprise space is, if you're looking to downstream with your stakeholder group, go upstream in terms of who else is benefiting, who are the upstream stakeholders who are benefiting from what you're doing. And perhaps your idea of your customer or your target audience just needs to be broadened a bit and looked up a bit. So that might be something to think about. And then to the point that Sean made, it's not always about equal access, but about equitable access, right? So the difference between equity and equality. So it's about right sizing your model to meet those different groups where they're at, and not just a one size fits all. So yeah, really great points there. Next question, I'm gonna just pass this over to Dan. And so one of the questions from the audience is, I'm very new to these concepts. How do you define what seed funding is, Dan? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So part of our challenge that we've noticed when it comes to funding is that funders define seed funding differently from other funders, and social entrepreneurs define seed funding different from other funders. So one of the projects I would like to do for Alberta is work with funders and social entrepreneurs to start actually defining what exactly seed is. I can give you a stab at what I think like seed funding is and pre-seed funding is, but the challenge is going to be, you're going to find a lot of funders in Alberta and nationally even more who are going to have a different definition. So if we want to serve the sector properly, we need to start seeing if we can agree on those terms. And I don't know, Jane, if you would agree with that and what your particular view on how you would define seed funding is.
Yeah, and Jordana was probably weigh in on this too, because that's really your wheelhouse. Seed usually to me is like right first at the beginning. You're planting the seed to get it started. And normally debt financing isn't something that is well done through that kind of model, because how are you going to pay it back? So it's early money booster, I guess, would be a way to look at seed, getting some seed money, what they call love money, which is like your mom, and all of that kind of thing. But Jordana, maybe you want to speak to it.
In the entrepreneurship ecosystem, we have a similar challenge, and a lot of folks look at either the level of technology development. There's a scale that's pretty commonly accepted called the technology readiness scale. There's a parallel to a commercial readiness scale. But I think you nailed it for us, Jane, when we think about the stage of USeed, which is meant to be a seed stage fund. We're looking at pre-revenue ideas, maybe early revenue ideas. So really trying to prove out a business model, and typically a place that angels may play, but as you said, friends, family, and fools usually fill that that position. And so that's how we look at it. But Dan, you've nailed it. And we would be very grateful to participate in that conversation around creating better alignment.
You, in the tech world, you have far better definitions, and Dan's taking the lead in trying to get us to define things better. But yeah, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on that point around seed capital from a financial institution standpoint is, you know, to the point made here, it's what allows you to launch, to get started, to actually start to develop your, you know, minimal viable product, or just something that you can bring to market, like a small test, a pilot of your idea. And usually seed capital through crowdfunding, through friends, families, schools, that can definitely go a long way. I'm going to try to sneak in 2 questions before we wrap up. So I'm going to, I love the depth and the breadth of this conversation, but I'm going to just ask for a bit more rapid fire on these next 2 questions. So this one I'm going to ask maybe Sean, if you could address. So the question comes from the audience around, could you maybe speak to some of the potential complications of running a fee-for-service program in terms of CRA from a tax standpoint?
Well, we don't pay tax. So, you know, we're a not-for-profit, we're a charity. We are tax exempt. Because we're, you know, licensed. One of the benefits of being a not-for-profit operating in a city, for example, is that we're licensed under the province, and the city doesn't have as much control over the type of business that we can operate or how we can operate. That's all governed by the province, not by the city. So it gives, we've been able to use that to our advantage. So I don't know, does that answer the question? I'm not sure if it does.
I'm not sure if it does. I mean, they're looking for, you know, input on how would a non-for-profit who's running a fee-based service, so earned income, earned revenue stream, would they need to deal with the CRA at all in any case?
That really depends on what you're doing. If you are a not-for-profit trying to run a subway, then yes, likely there will be some things. And I know that there's quite a bit of debate about that going on right now. In fact, the National Music Center with the King Edward, because it's a sort of for-profit bar that they operate, restaurant, they've tried to sort of circumvent some of that. Because we offer a community, you know, sort of social service and product, that we are tax exempt, and in fact we don't have to charge GST either, and we went through a whole thing with the government to make sure that was the case. So our programs are all tax exempt. I do know that what you would want to do is speak to a professional about those details, and we take a lot of guidance around from our professional counsel, both legal and accounting, to make sure, and they keep me in line. If I want to do something, you know, we were up for potentially having a mobile tower on our building, and my accountants were like, I don't think that's a good idea, because it's gonna change the parameters. So I don't think that there's a blanket answer. I think you have to look individually at what you're trying to accomplish and get the proper professional help.
Absolutely, get the right professional help, but you may not have to turn yourself into the pretzels that some people think from a structural point of view to be able to keep doing what you want to do and still earn a decent, sustainable revenue stream to do it. Mm-hmm. So get the good advice, and maybe don't be afraid automatically.
I agree.
I guess the answer there is it very much depends on what your revenue generating arm is, and what industry perhaps, or how it's functioning, and to speak with an expert there would probably be the best bet. One more question, and then I'm going to close with a rapid fire, sort of one key insight from each of the panelists for our audience today. We've got about 5 minutes left. So the question is really around something that Jordana and others have talked about with regards to how do we navigate in the midst of this humanitarian and financial crisis of this pandemic with such constrained resources. And Jordana spoke a lot to this notion of capacity building through partnerships and collaboration, and that's certainly a big part of the social entrepreneurship space. So a question to, maybe Dan, I'll ask you this one is, what are some cross-sectoral partnerships that you already see taking shape? And I know Trico Foundation is certainly at the intersection of that, but how that you think are successful today, or that you hope will come forward in the future?
There's
Dan, I think we lost your, there you are. Okay.
I'm back. Sorry. There's tons of options, and part of the challenge is there's no easy answers, and cross-sector partnerships, like any partnership, are going to take a lot of work, but there really is an extraordinary wide variety of options. One of the resources that we'll be sharing after this presentation is actually, believe it or not, a report from Social Entrepreneurship Netherlands, which talks about 3 examples that social enterprises have used for cross-sector partnerships that have just done amazing things. And I'll just give you one example. There's a company called Chocolonely, which is a weird name, but it tries to tackle the fact that apparently a lot of chocolate is produced through slave labor. So they have a guaranteed slave-free chocolate. And what they've done is they've now created a platform where anybody that wants to use the platform can use it to confirm that their chocolate as well is slave-free. And they've just had this huge announcement of a major grocery store in the Netherlands is joining them on this. And of course, not only is a huge kind of funding boom for them, but they're now creating this partnership to say, how can we better figure out how to track supply chains to make sure that they're slave-free. So it's just like one example. The report is a fantastic read. And again, you'd be astonished at the wide array of possibilities for cross-sector partnerships.
Yeah, and I think, bang on, that's a great example. It just proves how that grocery store needs more purpose to operate, as customers, employees are looking for more purpose-driven organizations to spend their dollars at, but also who they want to align with from an employment standpoint. So it benefits them, and they also have the resources and the scale to help grow this social enterprise. And so together they're really coming to live that blended value that you spoke about earlier, Dan. Thank you so much. We've got about a minute and a half, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Karen. Rapid fire, 20 seconds or less, panelists. For the audience who tuned in today, we had an hour and a half long session. If there's just one thing that you hope they remember from this today, what is it? And I'll start with Jordana.
I'm going to be contrarian like Jane. It's a call to action for all of us to consider as individuals in our organizations, where our mindsets and ways of operating are actually preventing the different type of thinking that we would like to see around us.
Jane?
I'm going to echo Jordana. If you can think about things slightly differently and look at it from a different lens, it might give you a lot of answers and show you that there's opportunity in this time. As scary as it may sound, there really are different ways to just shift your thinking slightly that may give a whole new view of the world.
Sean?
I think it is to, dream blue sky and look into those possibilities, similar to what my colleagues are saying. It doesn't hurt to investigate. It doesn't mean that you're committed to something. I think that, getting thoughts and opinions and looking at alternate ways and being honest with yourself about those things at the end, that doesn't hurt. I think any good organization should be doing that all the time and not just sit on their laurel. We've done this way for this long, and that's just how we do it. Get out of trying to protect yourself from doing it the way we've always done it, and be more open and comfortable with the idea that, well, tomorrow's a new day and maybe we can do some things different.
Thanks for that. And Dan, we'll wrap it up with you.
Yeah, it's really echoing those sentiments and what I started with, which is move away from this definition focus, i.e., gee, if I do this, am I a social enterprise? And ask yourself, what do you want to do with social entrepreneurship? Like, if you could use the business models to solve social problems to the ultimate extent that you would like to serve your mission, what would that actually look like? And let that kind of inform the journey that you take with social entrepreneurship. Focus on the aspiration, not just the technical, is this a social entrepreneurship or not?
Love that. I'm taking that advice myself. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much to this panel. It's been amazing, such a rich conversation, and I feel I've learned so much from each of you. Thank you for bringing your expertise and really leaning into this. Karen, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you. Wow, that was amazing discussion. Like, I was nodding like crazy the entire time over the last hour and a half. I wish that GoTo had the thumbs up, because I would have given it to you guys a lot. You've given me a new perspective and much to think about the interrelationship between purpose and profit worlds and the ever shrinking or perhaps non-existent gap that should be between them. Thank you to all of you as panelists for joining us today, and for Neetu for expertly guiding us as a moderator for today's session. Yes. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, ATB Financial. Great to have you on board. And to our supporters, the Matart Foundation, PwC Canada, and our media partner, Post Media. But wait, there's a little tiny bit more. If you enjoyed today's discussion, consider joining us next week for a free webinar focused on thinking like a startup, for a deeper dive into entrepreneurial innovation with the wonderful David Yiptong of Platform Calgary. And there's still more. Just a quick reminder that our 2020 Bolin National Nonprofit Salary Survey, which is a social enterprise for CCVO, is closing in a few weeks. So be sure to get us your data if you're a subscriber, and if you have yet to subscribe but can take advantage of timely salary information, then please visit our website for more information. You would be a customer of ours, and I'm learning everything. Thank you again to everyone who attended today, to our panelists, to our supporters. I want to give a shout out to the CCVO team, Marissa Barber, Mary Polychronis, and Marok Yosefashi for all your work behind the scenes today. Yes, I know we cannot do it without you. Please take a moment to complete the short survey that you'll see pop up after the meeting ends. And if you don't get a chance to do it today, it'll come in your mailbox. So check your inbox for the survey, and great reads as suggested and referenced by our panelists today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay warm. I hope you join us again soon. Our next Nonprofit at 2 is Thursday, February 18th, focused on systemic racism in the nonprofit sector and diversity, and we hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.